Hi there, this is Prague Talk, a podcast from Radio Prague International, and my name is Ian Willoughby. This time out I have not one but two guests, namely Vít Hořejš, founder of the Czechoslovak-American Marionette Theatre in New York, and his life partner Bonnie Stein. The pair have just presented here in Prague Wooden Hearts, an indie movie starring Vít that Bonnie produced and also appears in. The film also co-stars the Czech-made puppets, some of them 2 centuries old, that allowed Vít to start the marionette company over 3.5 decades ago. And I spoke to Vít Hořejš and Bonnie Stein for this edition of Prague Talk. Vít, I'd like to start with the Czechoslovak-American Marionette Theatre. I know it began in New York in the early 1990s, and I understand the whole story began when some old marionettes were found at the Jan Hus Church in Manhattan.
Indeed. I actually had 3 marionettes. I was involved in a production, very avant-garde production, too avant-garde for my taste, of Goethe's Faust Part 2. And I told the director about the tradition of marionette Faust as the biggest hit of the old itinerant puppeteering families. And she said, okay, take a scene, rewrite it, direct it with puppets. And my mother bought me a devil in Prague from a collector.
She posted the devil to New York?
She posted. The devil got an exit stamp on his hoof and on his soul, and made it to New York. And then I got a witch after that, just because the family continued supplying me with puppets, and a princess. I was doing storytelling besides theater, so I involved those puppets in the storytelling, and then I did it once at the Jan Hus Church in New York, 74th Street, in what used to be the Czech neighborhood on the Upper East Side. And they told me we used to have a puppet theater here, and I kept asking what happened to the puppets. The theater has not been active for quite a while until they let me go to the attic, and there I found in an old chest 24 ancient marionettes, which turned out to be 100 to 200-year-old.
What condition were they in?
It's amazing how lindenwood lasts, but they didn't have any strings, any controls. Some of the costumes were falling apart.
And were they Czech-made originally?
They were Czech-made eventually. So this is way before I started the company. This is maybe 84 or some such year. But I kept thinking about it, and when I quit the Ta Fantastica Blacklight Theatre, it was kind of obvious with another friend who studied puppetry in Prague that we started this company. We did Faust, of course, as the first production right there at Jan Hus Church in front of the altar. Our devils were flying back and forth. And that was the beginning of the theatre with the ancient theatre puppets, so we had to attach strings, make controls. I learned how to make controls.
Is it the case that a good part of your repertoire is old Czech fairy tales?
That was the start. And the first show was this very traditional marionette version of Faust. But then I very much admired drag theatre from Eastern Bohemia, and they really convinced me that puppetry, marionette theatre had some future, because they were mixing puppets with live performers, and that was really interesting. So our first Faust was almost traditional, with puppeteers who you couldn't see. They were hidden behind the curtain, but eventually the devil tore down the curtain and the puppeteers were seen. But after that we did shows that were developed mostly by me, but that were contemporary or almost contemporary themes and mixed live performance with the marionettes.
Well, now you and Bonnie are here in Prague. You're about to present your film Wooden Hearts, which centres on you, the puppeteer, and the marionettes. How did this project come about, Bonnie?
So during the pandemic in New York, we were actually living outside the city for a while and kind of stuck there. But Vít was asked to, he was cast in a play, or in a film by Owner Tuchel, who is our director of our film, in a sort of a controlled environment in a church, and he was the puppeteer with the devil, and I don't remember the entire scene, but it's called Scenes in an Empty Church. And then Owner was fascinated by the puppets, and we started to talk a little bit more about various projects and things. So eventually we said, let's try to do something together. And this film was the object of it. I mean, at first, Vít was invited to Nebraska, where there's a big Czech community, to do a performance. And the local presenter was very excited about Vít coming, and but we told him, I also help make all the tours and produce, and we told him that one show driving all the way to the Midwest from New York City is not really enough, and he managed to get 9 locations. So then the question was, who's going to go with Vít? Whether we have an extra puppeteer, which sometimes, or a musician. And then we spoke to Owner about making a film, and Vít had a different idea for a different film, and Owner had a different idea. We finally came up with a road trip film.
And Owner plays one of the main characters in the film. You also act in the film.
Yes.
How did you both find the experience of making it?
Well, I had a different experience because I didn't go on the 3 weeks almost of touring around the Midwest. But it was, he's a very creative guy. There was some basic script, but there was also some improvisation. I thought it was fascinating and actually a lot of fun.
Since it was not the film I wanted to make about a 19th century puppeteer, Czech-American puppeteer who traveled around the Midwest, and he had everything for the film, for a movie. He was a bigamist. He made fake money, counterfeiter, and went to prison for that and escaped for a while from the prison. Anyway, that was not happening, so I was just going with the flow, except I kept telling Owner and the crew, whenever said that, now Vít does this, Vít does that. I said, this is not about Vít, give that character a name already, because yet again, we did use as a background me telling puppet stories with the puppets, but it's a fiction. The whole film is fictional, and it's important to know.
I wanted to ask you, how much is the character close to you or based on you?
The background, the storytelling with marionettes, they are shots from actual performances that I did, but everything that's built on top of it, yes, there is traveling and long drives and things like that, like I did. But the whole story, the personal story, and there's also one of the most important things, besides a lot of womanizing that, of course, cannot be about me, is about my son that I supposedly turned from a puppet, give him a life among people, and he's unhappy about that. So it's a reverse Pinocchio story. So that, for me, was also the most interesting thing about the film.
When you tour to these places like Nebraska, who are the audience members usually?
Way back, I did a tour. I just kind of stumbled into a school tour. So that was mostly schools and some Indian reservations and reservation schools and things like that. This time there were some schools as well, and unusually so, it was mostly Czech communities, because it all started through the Czech embassy, through the cultural attaché at the Czech embassy, who had that interest from a beer fest in Nebraska that wanted entertainment, and they ended up having a puppet show. That was the first beer fest I ever performed for. And these Czech communities were really, really so much into it. That was great. During my school tour, that was 3.5 months all over from Idaho to New Mexico. I had 2 Czech communities in 151 shows. And this was all, was it 9 stops, I believe?
9.
In 7 Czech communities. And they really loved it. They all kind of have an inkling that there is such a tradition, and they were so happy to encounter it live.
There's one scene in the film where the puppeteer's van is stolen, spoiler, and all the marionettes are in it. Given how the marionettes are presumably completely irreplaceable, valuable, when you travel, do you have to take any particular precautions?
I used to be very, very cautious about whenever I was in a motel. It was up the stairs, 2 flights, and I would drag a heavy trunk all the way up to my room for the night. Eventually, I really became less cautious about it. And once in New York, where I shouldn't be leaving anything in a van overnight, I did it, and the van was broken into, and I was flabbergasted. The trunk was open, the puppets were strewn around the back of the van, and none of them was gone. They all stayed there because the guy, or I suppose it was a guy whoever broke in, had no idea, first of all, how valuable they were, and probably would not be able to get the value for them. Actually, in the film, you have that happening, that the hitchhiker who eventually becomes my helper, he pushes through to be my helper, played by the director of the film, who steals the van with the puppets, is trying to sell them. And of course, when he says they're $2,000 each or more than that, he's offered $50 or something like that.
We do have an extensive insurance policy, but the truth is, they're not replaceable unless they're recreated. We have, though, I think that you might remember, and one of the things we did kind of early on is make some copies. We had them made here in Prague. The devil that Vít had, which is about 120 or so. So we have now 6 devils of various sizes. And some of the other really valuable ones we've had copies made.
So you have like substitute devils.
They never are exactly good enough, though. It's something about those old ones that really, the expression, the way the carvers did, it's just phenomenal. But there are good people here that have helped to make copies. Not in the U.S. We've never found a really good carver there that can do that.
They're very resilient, and they lived that many years, yet we didn't feel like knocking them about so much. That's why we made the copies. We also had the copies made larger than those puppets. Traditionally, actually, in history, those puppeteering families would have bigger and bigger puppets to compete with each other, yet still we made bigger copies.
When you say competition, is anybody else doing anything like you in New York or anywhere in the States, do you know?
Nothing with traditional marionettes.
Traditional Czech marionettes.
For those 30 plus years or is it 40?
30 plus.
That this interest endures, surprisingly, in involving puppets. It's more about developing, making, using object puppetry, making puppets and we've done that in some of our shows as well, from contemporary objects or from unusual objects rather than, there are no carvers around in the United States.
There are a bit.
There are, but there's just no market for it. Just like in the old times, the carvers could not live by making marionettes. They were carvers of saints, and that's how they learned their art, and you can see it on the old marionettes. People say, I see them smiling, or I see them, their face features moving, because when you carve a martyr, I guess you somehow put everything. You put happiness, and you put the pain, and you put everything in that face, and somehow the marionettes have it all in them, made by the old puppeteers.
And tell me, I understand you have also had some Czech collaborators over the years, including Petr Sís, the well-known illustrator and writer, and Michal Kotzab, the Prague musician and ex-politician.
Well, Michal Kotzab goes way back to Prague, actually, when I was not doing puppetry, and I did the prose of the Trans-Siberian by Blaise Cendrars. And that was just jazz music and text, which is half-hour long text. And Michal Kotzab was a conservatory student, and I put him on the stage of Rubin for the first time. And he did a wonderful job, and then we used his music again when we remounted the production. That time it was as a dance theater with that text and music, and eventually the third version was with puppeteers. Petr Sís, that's only over a year ago, we did the foul play, the Conference of the Birds, which really I met this old Persian epic poem through, and it would be very hard to understand. I tried and did read the whole original, but he compresses it so wonderfully that it's understandable, and it's just like a plan for a puppet show. And by the way, we've talked about it. So he let us use his illustrations, which mostly we used as projected, because the puppets that we made, as we talked about it earlier, none of them are marionettes and are an unusual combination of materials, like some of the birds have feathers that were made from New York City parking tickets that every driver will recognize with dread.
But Peter's book was the impetus, because he has a version of the Conference of the Birds, and he worked with our set and costume designers. So the set designer made a lot of projections that were actually right from the book illustrations. He painted on the floor also one of the illustrations and built these clouds in the sky. It's absolutely gorgeous. And Peter was consulting as well as watching all rehearsals and sitting with us. We've known him, our children grew up together. We've known him in New York City for more than 30 years.
It so happens that Peter, at the same time someone else was making a production of the Conference of the Birds, and Peter said, "Yours is the best." So that was great to hear from him.
As you say, you've been doing this now for several decades. I presume a day will eventually come, let's hope it's a long time into the future, when you hang up your marionettes or when you call it a day. Do you have any plan for what to do with them?
We're working on a legacy plan, but it's not easy. Yeah. Well, in fact, Vít has had apprenticeship program going that was supported by the New York State Council on the Arts. So there are some people who are trained, but whether any of them will take the marionettes and be able to do exactly the same kind of thing, that's another story.
There is really no one. I have a company. Some people have been with me for almost 30 years now, but they're also getting older. And those puppets at Janus Church slept there for over 50 years. So I don't know if they're going to go to sleep again for half a century.
We hope not.
Many thanks indeed for that interview to Vít Hořejš and Bonnie Stein. And their film Wooden Hearts really is charming and well worth a watch if you get the chance. Prague Talk is a podcast from Radio Prague International, and if you enjoyed my conversation with Vít and Bonnie and are new to the pod, why not look up some of the earlier editions? Also, of course, it'd be great if you could subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. But for now, that's all from me, Ian Willoughby. Thanks so much indeed for listening to Prague Talk, and talk to you again very soon.